I think what you're looking at is COVID 2.0 because you're looking at economic warfare, number one, but also you're looking at economic warfare that is basically implementing the same thing that COVID did, which is you dramatically centralize control of strategic resources and shut down the weak or the small guys so that you can centralize and consolidate power. Remember, Wesley Clark said we were going to attack 7 countries in 5 years? Well, the last of those 7 countries is Iran, and those countries were leakage in the central banking system. So if you wanted to implement an all-digital control grid through the financial transaction system, you needed those countries in the model. And in fact, they've imploded and sort of gotten control of each one of those countries, and Iran is the last one. And that's part of what you need if you're going to move forward with implementing what I call programmable money in the digital control grid. So Iran is leakage in the central banking system, and that's part of the problem. The other part of the problem is you have the United States who wants to be the multipolar power. They've shed their multipolar obligations. So they're saying, okay, we're not going to spend any money on being the global policeman, but we're going to be the unipolar bully. And you have the BRICS nation saying, we want to be a multipolar world, and we don't want to be controlled or dramatically drained economically by a unipolar bully. So we're going to do the BRICS payment system. And so there's real tension between, what the BRICS are trying to do and what the U.S. is trying to do. And of course, the Gulf is in the middle of it because the question is who controls the energy. Now, the United States has done tremendous work in trying to build energy self-sufficiency. And so if you look at its net supply, we are pretty much protected from this shutdown. Other countries, for example, Japan or the Philippines, are very, very vulnerable. But if you look at the balance of power globally, the U.S. relatively is put in the catbird seat by this kind of shutdown. And it's interesting, you would have laughed. One of the economic spokesperson for the White House said the U.S. economy will be fine because we're net surplus energy. The consumer won't be, but the economy will be fine. So now it's a billionaire economy. We don't care how the consumers are. You're no longer a consumer, you're compost. One of my favorite videos was Larry Fink saying, we've changed the economic model so we can grow with a shrinking population. So if you look at the digital control grid, there are 3 main parts. The first is the digital ID, because it's very important. If I'm going to control everybody and everything with AI and machines, I have to be phenomenally precise, and I can aggregate all the data and all the databases around them. So identity is essentially perfect. And those databases and that database operation needs to be interoperable globally since it's a global model. And that means we need very high quality digital ID systems. Now, the different syndicates, the different cartels compete to be that digital ID system. So the healthcare guys want the vaccine passports to be the digital ID system, and the tech brothers have their version, and, Bill Gates has his version. So you're seeing a lot of competition. But essentially, the big stopper on the digital ID was the conservatives. They knew how dangerous a digital ID was, and they tried to push it in the Patriot Act, and everybody on the conservative side has fought it for years at both the federal and state level. But I came to the conclusion during the campaign that Trump was being put in to use election fraud and immigration as the excuse to promote and lock up the digital ID system. Because, of course, you always want to fund it with taxpayers' money. You want to put people in a digital concentration camp and make them pay for it. And if you see how they're using immigration and election fraud, watch Steve Miller, because Steve Miller is sort of the linchpin in the administration for trying to basically tear up the Constitution and put all these things in place. Anyway, so, it was clear to me that Trump was going to use those 2 things, and that's exactly what's happening. I mean, if you look at what's happening with the SAFE Act, it's going to bring much less fair elections. It's going to, mess up the voting even worse. But what it's going to do is it's going to help that digital ID system. You don't need these bills. So we had good elections before digital technology. We had borders that worked before digital technology. And you have all these excuses why we need more digital technology. And every time we get more digital technology, we get more central control. So the whole story is BS. So we have all the laws in the books at the federal government to get things to work and to enforce any criminality that's going on. But we don't. There's 21 trillion missing from the federal government. Has anybody pursued it or gotten it back or prosecuted somebody for stealing it? No. Has anybody been prosecuted for Epstein? No. Come on. We don't need more laws. We need to enforce the good laws we have. So let's go back to 1998. From 1998 to 2015, there's 21 trillion missing from DOD and HUD. During the bailouts between 2006 and 2012, there were 29 trillion of bailouts. Some people say, well, some of it got paid back, whatever, but I'll use 29. That's 50 trillion. Then during the going direct reset during COVID, you injected 5 trillion directly, and that's not even counting quantitative easing. Now we're up to 55 trillion. That's a lot of money. But here's the thing. The federal government has been run outside the laws related to financial management since 1998. Now, we got to 2017, and Dr. Skidmore and I published a report on the 21 trillion missing. So this is from federal government documentation of their finances. And each year, they refuse to produce audited financial statements as required by law. So in 2017, after we published it, there was a big hullabaloo and an argument about why the DOD kept, they'll say they're going to produce an audit in 8 years, and then they don't. Then it's another 8 years, and then they don't. Anyway, and I will tell you, I don't think the pandemic could have happened without this. In October 2018, the Trump administration and the House and the Senate, Republican and Democrat, all together agreed on a policy called Federal Accounting Standards Advisory Board Statement 56. Now, that's a name that could put you to sleep, right? So you know what that policy basically said? That a secret group of people, by a secret process, could take a portion of the government finances and move it into a secret compartment and not include it in the financial statements. And it would apply not just to the 24 covered agencies, but 150 related government entities, which means if you go to the financial statements of the U.S. government, they are entirely meaningless because you don't know what's in and you don't know what's out and you don't know why it's out or who did it. It's just like we're in la la land. Now, let me explain what that means to you and your 401k and your IRA. That means that all the stocks and bonds for large cap, because with the classification laws and the national defense laws, it then umbrellas and includes the big banks and government contractors and IT firms doing work with the government. Okay, they can keep some or their books secret as well. So now what you've got is you have the majority, in my opinion, of the large cap bonds and stock market in the United States. Everything's secret. Their financial statements, in my opinion, I don't know what to make of them. I have an investment screen and none of those stocks get on my screen. And the reason they don't get approved for their screen is I don't know what their financial statements mean. I don't know how to analyze them. I used to always read the federal budget and finances. I don't anymore. It doesn't mean anything to me. And, when I first had to litigate against the Department of Justice and they would falsify evidence and they would lie, the judges assumed that they were telling the truth. They would always give the government the benefit of the doubt. The judges don't do that anymore. They know the Department of Justice and the government lies to them all the time. Anyway, so one is the digital ID. So we just talked about that. But then the second is programmable money. And programmable money, which is issued by the central bank, is often referred to as CBDC. But now we have stable coins and digital tokens and other forms of crypto. Think of this as a privately issued central bank digital currency because it comes with a private face, but behind it, you have government policies that implement and can implement any rule system, the CBDC could do. So it's funny because if you look at who the likely big issuers of those crypto are going to be, it's the banks that own the central bank. So it's kind of like meet the new boss, same as the old boss. But now you have a private face. And if you remember the censorship through Twitter, the government's telling them what they're going to censor, and then they're censoring, and the government's telling you, well, they're a private organization. They can do whatever they want, right? So you had this little public-private game to get the worst of both worlds. And it was a way of pulling off censorship without being overtly the government or the central bank. Anyway, so programmable money is money where the rules of how and where you can use that money are embedded right into the currency. So right now, if you take a $10 bill and go, nobody can instruct that $10 bill, you can't buy pizza. But with digital money, you can program not only thousands of rules into the money, but you can make it dynamic. So I have you under surveillance, and if you're not good, I can punish you, or I can charge you fees, or I can increase your taxes. So it's a very dynamic system. And so we have been working with legislation to put up guardrails to say you can't use programmable money to strip people of their fundamental constitutional rights. So you can't turn off their money if you don't like what they said on social media, or you can't fine them, automatically if you don't like what they said on social media. So a lot of people know the concept of the Chinese social credit system. What we're saying is you can't use a social credit system to strip people of their constitutional rights, and you can't force them to use programmable money. You have to give them an option other than that if they don't want to use your programmable money. And so this is just the idea of putting up guardrails so that financial transactions can't be used to do super controls, whether it's from private parties or the government or both. Anyway, so we have model legislation, and we've been working with states and various activists to try and implement this. And it's important because if you look at the speed at which now the volume of crypto outstanding is going to go up, it's going to be extraordinary. And of course, all of it can be programmable, whether it's stable coins with dollars or stable coins with gold or stable coins with euros or whatever. You've got to put those guardrails on because this is money that's going to be run by machines. So we have digital IDs, we have programmable money. The third thing we have is the hardware infrastructure you need to make all of this go. And at the heart of the infrastructure, in addition to telecommunications and satellites, of course, are the data centers. So what is AI good at? AI is great at tracking and implementing things that can be expressed mathematically. So financial transactions and spatial control. So what you're looking at in those data centers are the big brains that will run the surveillance and control system. They're not there to make businesses more efficient. They're not there to suddenly make our world more intelligent. And not only are they there to control you and me, but to do it in a way where we're financing it. We're paying to build our own control grid because this system will be run by the machines. You're talking about so much data and so much surveillance and analysis in real time that it needs to be essentially run by AI. And in that system, you have the Flock cameras. So Flock is a company that's doing deals with city council all over the country and counties to implement license plate readers so that they can track everybody, where they're going, what they're doing. The cars now all have cameras so they can watch you while you're driving. They can track everything you're doing. They can record it, ship it back to a variety of places. It's one of the reasons they want to kill switch, because if you're not good, they can also turn off your car or turn off your electricity. So it's not just turn off your money, turn off your power. And then the final thing is going to be drones and robots, because you're not going to be dealing necessarily with the local sheriff. You're going to be dealing with a team of humanoid robots made by Tesla who are going to work for the local sheriff's office or whatever the enforcement is. ICE ultimately will be replaced by robots is what I expect. So it's very dystopian. And you've got autonomous weapons. If you look at the Palantir system, the Palantir system, if you look at the Lavender system in Gaza, it was designed, in fact, so that the software picked the targets. And so if the target represented an international crime, there was no IDF officer who was legally responsible because the software picked the, So you're going to have a system which is run by AI and it's going to have robot and drones. And so if it makes a mistake and kills a human, nobody's responsible legally.